and we look forward a lot to what you've got to say too.
Yeah, it's a big pleasure for me to be here, and I'm very happy to discuss this. And Andrew, my thanks also for this tremendous, huge work on a treaty sort of template which ought to be discussed. And I guess the two of us, we will have a couple of bilateral occasions, and I hope so, to go through more semantic sort of things. But to say this up front, I have 10 or 15 minutes here that do not want to go into details of this template. But I listened carefully to a couple of the contributions which were made, and let me say the following. Perhaps some of you may have read what I have written with Robert Menasser, which was a manifesto for the European Republic sort of 2 or 3 weeks ago. And essentially, we wrote this out of sheer frustration. It's easy to imagine how frustrated one can be these days about Europe when you feel that the whole system, but especially your own country, moves completely against the wall, like in James Dean, denn sie wissen nicht, was sie tun. Yeah? So we wrote this manifesto and we said, look, I mean, dreaming must be allowed. We know we are losing the argument anyway, but at least that's what we had to say. But we choose carefully Republic, because what I wanted to do, and that is very dear to me, I wanted to wipe off from the table 20 years of discussion on federalism, which I think we already lost. The word is just disgusting, distorting, and doesn't help. Be it good or not, that's not a value of the word. It's just like even between France and Germans, and I happen to have had a French husband, that's where my name comes from. You can't do this. There's too much culture in what federalism is, and apparently this is not the notion that flies. Yeah? And the second thing I wanted to do is I wanted to move, Robert Menasser and myself, what we wanted to do based on his book, The Europäische Landbote, which is very sorry not being translated into English or French at the time being, but only a German market book, to move away from United States of Europe for 2 reasons. Because it gives the states, the member states, the key to European integration process, key and authority, but also because it's a copy, sort of culturally, a copy United States thing. And these days nobody wants to copy the United States. We just don't. My son, my eldest son, is currently studying in UCLA, Los Angeles, and the only thing he tells me every 3rd day on Skype is, we Europeans, we hang out together because we don't like the Americans. And the Asians go in a pyjama, working in the library overnight, and we Europeans, we don't like this. And Europeans, he's now sleeping over at the friend of a gay British whatever person, you know, Brits are pretty European in UCLA. So that's a very important message here. And the moment you have gone through a WG, I don't know, Wohnungsgemeinschaft, when you live with penis, and my son was in a Wohnungsgemeinschaft with a Chinese, a Russian, an American, and himself as a Franco-German being, yeah. The European culture is a dinner with a glass and pasta and wine. Because the Chinese cannot do it, he can only have dinner with an iPad. The Americans does not even understand the concept of a glass in correspondence to a bottle and a can. And the Russian is anyway always drunk. The moment you have experienced this, European Republic comes into play. Yeah? Because the point we are in history now is that we need to create this Wir-Gefühl, the sort of we identity thing, and therefore we were happy to get this Res Publica thing out to move us away from United States of Europe and away from legal discussions about federation. That was the only goal, a semantic trick. The interesting thing is, I got 483 hate emails after the state appeared in FAZ. I guess sociologically from most men over 60 and FAZ readers. But I got 2,700 young Twitter followers, most likely young European, Cypriots, Portuguese people. And the FAZ reader were completely no against me, and the others were yes. And this is where the discussion is. So we have a generational dynamics in this discussion. And I think this is very important to know when we are now looking at what should be done. So just to Andrew, I'm not sitting here pretending that I have a counter concept or a better concept or whatever. I think it's pretty clear that we all in this room want the same. And the only tactical thing is what best semantics do we find for what we want. Yeah? And this is about little wordings and being clear, but it's, I'm not here to argue for my concept versus a Spinelli group proposal, whatever, yeah? Just to make this very clear. Yeah? So I will give you 5 sort of thoughts, which I think are important in this respect. The first is, I guess what we are sitting in terms of the historical situation we're in is that we have this entanglement between what I call administrative technocratic process, which is disentangled from a political and social dynamics. What I mean is that the current EU system, governance, Eurogroup, fiscal compact, blah, 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 seemingly works sort of well. I mean, at least there is governance in the structure, the governance is even improved, although delayed, blah, blah, blah. But it's technocratic, and it's disentangled in the meantime from anything we see in the southern countries as a political and social dynamic. And the problem is whether at some point in time we will bring these dynamics together, or in other words, whether the administrative technocratic dynamic will come too late for the political social dynamic which is in the terrain. Yeah? If you say this, then Merkel's sentence, if the Europe fails, is the sentence of yesterday. The sentence of today is if the Euro stays like this, we will lose European democracy, and we are well underway doing so. Yeah? If this is the case, then you come to the conclusion that we live in a system which is systemically exhausted, which is the system we are in, and you and myself, we are all part of this system. And the system we are all in, which is exhausted, is not able to deliver the solutions we need. If we come to grips with the fact that this euro does need more fiscal integration, eurozone budget, fiscal capacity, blah, 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 then for a variety of reasons, which you all know, especially Germany, Karlsruhe, the system seems not able to deliver in the time frame we have the solutions we need. Yeah? If this is true, then the real question is, how do we come from A to B? Yeah? So we are in a Hegelian setting of history, which is we move synthesis through thesis. And everybody who has read Hegel's Rechtsgeschichte knows that normally these moments in history come with constitutional breakdowns. Yeah? The moment you lose the systemic capacity for change, it comes with constitutional breakdown. So now you are telling me I'm basically calling for a revolution. In essence, I do. Although I know that it's very complicated because looking at the French Revolution ending up with Robespierre is not a nice situation. By the way, one of the nastiest comments on my Republic thing was Guérot auf die Guillotine. It's very amusing to get all these emails. Anyway, so the A to B thing, I think, is the systemic crux here, and nobody has an answer. Nobody has. Your point on the UK behavior, treaty change, how we go, nobody has an answer. And this answer is still the sort of most important thing to find. But precisely because that might be the real point here, calling for a convention is feeding the old system. Because it is feeding nation states who get through representatives in a setting of doing the treaty change. And the idea of Republic Respublica at least would call for a new defined citizen-European relationship in which you do not call for a convention, but you ought to call for a constituent. Huh? Again, I'm just saying I'm dreaming, but you are also dreaming of a convention. Somebody said it here, it's not really likely that we get the convention. So if I dream, then perhaps just do the right dream. And the right dream, in my opinion, would be constituent and not convention. Because then, somebody else said it in the room, sort of, we need to better explain. Yeah? Citizens. The next time I hear we need to better explain, I walk out of the room. I'm so fucking fed up with this argument. We need to give ownership to people and not better explain. The last time I sat here in Brussels, not so long ago, I had that with Viviane Reding, who was all about, she was with all these representatives, directors from the European houses, 1,500 people who on the ground do the Europe work. And then Viviane Reding would say, yeah, I know for you, you have a hard work to do because sometimes people pose silly questions. But we need to respect this, and we need to better explain. And I feel like this is really awkward. And this means just understanding nothing when you reply like this. So I'm no longer on the better explain argument. If people feel like we are a system in which at least 50% of the people in Southern Europe feel that they don't live well, then the system is crap. And then it's not a problem of explanation, then it's a problem of changing the system and whether we can, yes or no. Whether we can, yes or no, there's a big question mark, but at least it's no longer about better explanation. So I think the duty of all those is in a way the very difficult task that we have to do is something like what Jean-Paul Sartre did in the 70s, roughly saying socialism might be fine, but USSR is crap. And I am approaching myself to the moment where I need to say the European idea is really wonderful, but the EU system is really crap. And it has produced vested self-interest and non-corrected liberal policy or whatever over 20 years. There's a huge amount of vested self-interest in this building and the Commission building, and I do no longer sign up for this system. I'm not sure whether I win the argument, nor am I sure that I can build something differently, nor am I not sure which historical dynamic you would create if you go that way, but I think being intellectually fair is the first way to go to the truth and to be authentic and to not basically do yesterday's argument. If I'm there, then the question is how many people I have in terms of soldiers. Yeah? If you build pyramids, you need slaves. Actors theory, it's called in political science. So in terms of actors theories, I don't have a lot. I have 50 on a Saturday morning. I guess on any given marketplace in Europe where I stand with I have best 3 people. And I tell you who I've lost already. I have lost the unemployed south of Southern Europe. I've been traveling the past 6 months like hell. Yeah? So I know everybody from Cyprus to Portugal who we have already lost. The elderly, the youngsters. I know also all these Spanish people who are dancing down the German Berghain Club, all these completely frustrated 30-something young Europeans who come to Berlin to do the clubbing thing, but after clubbing half a year you feel like still something in life should be after clubbing, right? So I know these people because I happen sometimes to do clubbing, and I know what they tell me. But even worse, having lost these people for our discourse, is we have lost the smart elites of, say, the Eastern European countries, but also of many more countries. I talk to young, if I say young, sort of younger than I, sort of 30-something old Polish, Estonians, Lithuanian people recently. Yeah? And these are people who are sitting in governments, advising presidents, and so on and so forth. They are anywhere but on a federal argument, let alone on a more united argument. These people are smelling, for instance, the Poles, that there's something like a regional dynamic, that their country is somehow good, that there must be something like a regional cooperation scheme or something, but give me a break, not done by Brussels, and not in the sentence of more unity. So if I'm just sort of counting my people for what we want with this document, then we are few people, not to say very marginalized. Yeah? And that is, you need to think this with you when you are basically reasoning how you go out with your argument and to whom you are going out with your argument. I passed the German role in the whole game. It drives me nuts. It's like Heinrich Heine, denke ich, in Deutschland in der Nacht bin ich in den Schlaf gebracht, so don't blame me for what Germany does. So I guess that everybody who meets me is easily detectable that I moved into the position of the German blame gaming and Germany bashing person myself, so that's not what it's all about. But blaming Germany or not, there's a process of disintegration which is happening while we speak. And the real question is to pose the question, are we beyond peak or are we not yet beyond peak? Yeah? And for this to detect, I think, what is much more important to observe and to detect is, for instance, who will have the social networks of tomorrow? Ulrike Guérot or Emma Bonino, if she becomes president? Yeah? If you look at France, and you can count on your fingers that after the next European Parliament elections, probably Le Pen and Mélenchon together will have more than 40% in votes, which is sort of likely, then you must say that France is politically dead. Because then you have near to half of France, which is les extrêmes se touchent, Lénine. So France is ingouvernementable in the spirit of Foucault. But France is not Cyprus that we can smash down. France is just the biggest important partner of Germany. And if such a dynamic should happen, I tell you what, the German public discourse is not about to do it all alone. We don't do Europe, I mean, we do a lot of nasty things, but if France doesn't stand, it will be ever harder for Germany to do the little bit it still does. That's my message here. Yeah? So there are a couple of very interesting dynamics out there which we should observe and for which I honestly don't have any answers. But a lot of emotions, and sometimes emotion help. Interestingly enough, and that's the little smile I have, this Republican manifest that I wrote with Minas was within 10 days translated into Romanian, Portuguese, Italian, Espanol, Spanish, English, French, Netherlands, Czech. And I didn't do the translations. So the interesting thing to see is that this happened sort of by somebody. Huh? So there is perhaps a little thing out there in the Twitter and youngsters community, and there is perhaps a little community of youngsters who feel like there's much at stake. Their whole Erasmus sort of lifestyle is at stake if this thing should fail. And I think that's the bet we have. The bet we have to move on. Now, just a couple of very detailed points on Andrew and on the expose, the treaty thing, which is sort of detailed. If you follow me a little bit in this more revolutionary approach about where we stand, I think we should reflect this, or at least sort of more progressive style, we should reflect this in the wording. And there are 2 or 3 wordings which I increasingly start to hate. And one is economic government or economic governance, and which is in your, which is, I don't know, I'll tell you the linear. Anyway, why do I start to hate it? Because there's no government, there's no economic government which is not government. Social policy is government and defense policy is government because every policy triggers costs. And policy is nothing else than the collective choice about collective preferences. So everything is politics. And you cannot disentangle an economic government from the rest of government because the little rest of government, be that social, education or defense, still has the fact that it triggers costs, so it goes into a budget. So there's government as a whole. And I think the moment the EU system would stop talking about governance and call it government in the first place and trying to lure yourself into the idea that there could be any sort of hedged economic government which would not be government in total, that moment we could win. Because this is the moment when even my mother starts to understand what I'm talking about. But governance, she doesn't understand. And I think this is really important that we clarify the words we are talking about. Republic, I think, did a nice sort of semantic shift. Government would do another factor. EMS inclusive thing. I think the truth is, the moment we want what we want, we need to crack down the Commission and its existing body. Yeah? The Commission that you could see is that the European Diplomatic Action Service becomes a defense, foreign and defense ministry, that all these people who do the development stuff become a development ministry, that you get a treasury. So if you want the EU to be that government, which is basically sort of in the line of what you said, then you cannot go along the vested self-interest of the Commission, which is the Commission today. This is also the obvious truth. So I think much of the philosophical problem we are dealing with is form follows function. Yeah? That's an art thing. Form follows function. But we do function follows our thinking, or our thinking still follows the institutions or the institutional inertia of today. And we are altogether not daring enough. If we say form follows function, we define the function, it's pretty evident that we want to have an inclusive monetary union, which should be the kind seller of everybody will join, so on and so forth. But then you design the institutional system after the function you want it to have. But then you cannot be path dependent and determined by the institutional gravity and inertia of the current institution. And it's pretty evident the moment when, this Eurozone Parliament, I happen to have been writing this since 2010. in Europe, then Zone-Parlament, Eurobonds-Parlament, which is one of those German ideas which you can like or not like, but which I happen to like a lot as an idea because I think it's pretty logical. Those who were against Eurozone Parliament in the first place were the guys of the MP, I mean the European Parliament, just because of vested institutional self-interest before regarding function. And the same applies for the Commission. So I think if we are in this Hegelian synthesis moment, form follows function would do it. And then I still happen to believe, and that's why I'm running and waking up at 5 in the morning on a Saturday and whatever I do. But I think that moment we triple a little bit of authenticity ourselves into the system in terms of wording, notions, and where do we want. And we skip the old vocabulary and we do not move our own thinking into sort of the paradigms of the past. I think we still have a chance to win, basically. We still have a chance to win. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Guérot, for your passionate and almost desperate contribution. I think we want to take the floor now and try to be perhaps a bit more optimistic.
Well, no, I'd like, first of all, to thank you for what you've been able to bring us by way of provocation. I don't think that the present plight of Europe is the result of the strength of federalism or federalists in the past, but of our weakness. And we need, in my view, and I agree with you, that we are in extraordinarily critical circumstances, much more so than is broadly realized. In fact, I find the creeping complacency that we hear and the marginalization of problematical issues, problematical people like Grillo, problematical places like Cyprus, a complete absence of civilized European way of proceeding. So I agree with you absolutely about the critical nature of where we are. I would, but I believe, and I don't think this is just because I have a self-interest as a member of this House, that we have a last chance to try to get it right through the structures, institutions, formula that we've grown up with, tweaked, have learned to love and loathe in equal measure. And that chance is going to be provided once we've got through the elections to the European Parliament next year, which I think are critical, and I think the quality of those elections is very important. To what extent are we able to bring a serious and civilized European dimension into the campaign? And then after that, the creation of a new commission, also of huge importance. Because if we fail to create a commission which is superior in form and function, I might say personalities, to the present commission, then we are in serious jeopardy. And then after that, I have great faith, partly I suppose this is a self-interest, self-experience of the two previous conventions. The first to write the Charter, which I think is a great document. The second to have drafted that treaty which never flew. But the experience of the convention, the foment of thought, of argument, of sincerity, of passion, of articulation, of analysis of the problems and the crafting of solutions, the building of consensus, was extraordinary. It was a very rich experience, unique to the history of the EU, and I think we should try it again. And in order for us to be well prepared to try it again, perhaps for the last time, we need a juridical text as well as political thought written out, and that is the motivation behind the Spinelli Group's attempt to draft a fundamental law. And we speak very clearly of the need for government. In fact, I feel exasperated when you hear people grind on about democratic deficit, because I think that that's an excuse. I think that the serious problem is not the weakness of Parliament, but the absence of government. And before we get strong government, we won't actually have the mature, comprehensive, all-encompassing parliamentary democracy that we deserve. So I'm Ulrike and I are fellow travellers, and we don't disagree about where we want to end up, but we have a contrasting idea of ways and means. And I think it's important that this discourse between us, the two strands of federal thought, if you like, continues. An answer to some of the questions that were put a bit earlier. What are we going to do to progress this fundamental law? As I say, it will be published if we can complete it in time in July or in August, if not, and we will then have travel. And I've already spoken with our Spanish colleagues about the opportunity of going to Spain with a road show to speak to the Spanish Europeans about this. And I hope, Bertelsmann, who have the financial resources, will assist us roll it out in all member states. And I also, the European Council on Foreign Relations is an excellent instrument, I think, for growing the discussion at a very high level. On some of the specific points,